Hey, come in. How are you? Thanks for popping by. This is my little den. All a chap like me would ever want, eh? Except maybe chocolate cookies. I'm glad you come by because I wanted to start this series of talks on Off the Bookshelf. And I'm aware that for many people entering the futures field, they have no idea of its past, of where it came from. And, you know, there are some learned papers on that kind of thing, like in Richard Slaughter's wonderful series of books, The Knowledge Base of Future Studies. But I wanted to start off with this old book here. Nice coffee. It's nice to be able to slow down a bit. So here we've got Futures Shock, 1971. I remember my father, I was, 12, 13. He came home with a copy of this. He was quite excited by it. And of course, Future Shock by Alvin Toffler shook the world up in a sense. And I wouldn't say that it birthed futures, but it certainly gave it a new impetus, a lot of energy. And some of the other books we'll look at in this series of talk take their lead from this. For instance, the book I think I'll go to next, it's over there somewhere, called, what's it called? Anticipatory Democracy, Clem Bizolt. It's got some good essays in there. One particular one I like from Jim Data. But I'd like to give you a taste of the kind of thing that this book was doing in its time. Totally revolutionary. It doesn't use the full scope of futures language that we have inherited today, but that's developed over decades. So we've got, 5 to 6 decades of serious futures engagement from many serious and quite diverse thinkers happening. But Toffler set the stage. One of the things he was interested in, and there are lots of, the topics here are fantastic, a diversity of lifestyles, the fractured family, scientific trajectory, the kinetic image, and so on. So he covers a lot of ground, and I guess where he lands at the end there is one of his last chapters, if not the last chapter, is on anticipatory democracy. But I find that there's hints all the way through in his language, his images and everything, that are pointing to the kind of future work that we have going on today. What's interesting for him is that he has a strong bent towards the scientific, the empirical, but at the same time, as you'll hear, I think one of the sections I've chosen in here, just to give you a little taste of, illustrates this, that he knows there's so much more to it than that. And there's a space also for not knowing. So he says this in, what am I on, page 419, even more important than the specific bits of advanced information, however, is the habit of anticipation. So there he's using that word. Conditioned ability to look ahead plays a key role in adaptation. Indeed, one of the hidden clues to successful coping may lie in the individual's sense of the future. The people among us who keep us up with change, who manage to adapt well, seem to have a richer, better developed sense of what lies ahead than those who cope poorly. So he goes on to talk about anticipation, and there's some lovely stuff. He talks about forward imagining, for instance, a bit further down. So he's forward imagining, analysing and evaluating future possibilities and probabilities. Possibilities, probabilities. He's not yet, and I haven't yet found him referring to the preferred future here, but certainly he's flagging what has become, the 3 or 4 P's of future studies. Now, there's another great section here. Now, this one is in a section not on education, but on the strategy of social futurism, he calls it. And he says, the men and women engaged in this work, that's the work of futuring, as he would call it, would know that nothing is certain They would know that they must work with inadequate data. They would appreciate the difficulties inherent in exploring the uncharted territories of tomorrow. But man, because 1971 here, but man already knows more about the future than he has ever tried to formulate and integrate in any systemic and scientific way. In other words, we now have tools of anticipation unavailable to our ancestors. He finishes that thought off with, attempts to bring this knowledge together would constitute one of the crowning intellectual efforts in history. I think that's amazing, and one of the most worthwhile. So you're in good company. If you're coming into futures, thinking about that, the crowning intellectual efforts of history, that's what you're involved with. And to conclude, I've got a couple of really good quotes here, but one which I'll go with this one. So he says this: throughout the past, as successive stages of social evolution unfolded, man's awareness followed rather than preceded the event. We were quite passive in regards to the future, he says. Because change was slow, he or she could adapt unconsciously, organically, he says. Today, unconscious adaptation is no longer adequate. Today, unconscious faced with the power to alter the gene to create new species to populate the planets or depopulate the earth, man must now assume conscious control of evolution itself. Avoiding future shock, it's a good place to start ending up, isn't it? Avoiding future shock as he rides the waves of change, he must master evolution, shaping tomorrow to human need. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? To human need, not planetary needs yet. The consciousness hasn't expanded that far out. Instead of rising in revolt against it, he must, from this historic moment on, anticipate and design the future. This is really, really interesting book, and for its time, it was absolutely profound shift in the way we were orientating ourselves as social beings, I guess, towards a future that was complex, contested, uncertain, unstable even, and how we should be developing tools for navigating and finding our way towards what we now would call preferable futures. I hope that's really useful to you, and maybe you're going to rush off and find copies of this. They're easy to find. And thank you for popping by.